want to tell you about a free online class that I'm offering on Thursday, January 13th at 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern. It's called 3 Little Known but Powerful Immune Boosting Nutrients, and it will cover why natural immunity is important, especially in the COVID-19 era, the critical factors for developing natural immunity, the shortcomings and risks of over-the-counter medications for cold and flu, and how to use 3 natural and safe remedies to protect against infections and support your immune system. This is essential information to keep you and your family safe in the COVID era, so I hope you can make the class. And be sure to sign up even if the time doesn't work for you, because we'll be sending out a recording to everyone that registers. Go to cresser.co/immunity to learn more and save your spot. Once again, the class is on Thursday, January 13th at 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern, and you can go to cresser.co/immunity to register. I hope to see you in the class. As a lot of you know, I moved to Utah a couple of years ago, and it's a super dry state. I do a lot of mountain biking, hiking, and skiing, and when I do those activities in this dry of a climate, it's crucial to avoid getting dehydrated, and that's where Element comes in. What a lot of people don't realize is that healthy hydration isn't just about drinking water. It's about replacing water and electrolytes, which makes sense because you lose both water and sodium when you sweat. So both need to be replaced to prevent muscle cramps, headaches, and energy dips. Unfortunately, the typical solutions on the market, Gatorade, other sports drinks, and low-quality electrolyte packs, are often loaded with sugar and a lot of artificial colors and flavors. This is why I've become a huge fan of Element. Element is a zero-sugar electrolyte solution for people who want to stay hydrated but don't want to put a lot of junk in their bodies. It comes in super convenient individual packs that you just mix into your water bottle and you're good to go. No sugar or artificial junk, just electrolytes and great taste. Element was formulated by my good friend and former research biochemist Rob Wolf to provide the optimal ratios of sodium, potassium, and magnesium for health, performance, and energy. They also did a great job with the flavors. My favorites are orange salt and watermelon salt, but they have several other great flavors that are worth trying too. I've turned most of my friends and family onto Element and they love it, so I wanted to give you the chance to try it too. For a limited time, the folks at Element are offering a free Element sample pack, which comes with 8 packets of Element, 1 of each flavor they sell. All you have to do is cover the cost of shipping, which is $5 for US customers and location dependent for international customers. Element has been an absolute game changer for me and so many people I know. I put one in my water bottle virtually every day and never exercise or do anything active without it. I hope you get as much benefit from it as I do. Just go to drinkelement.com/Cresser. That's DRINKLMNT.com/Cresser to claim your free Element sample pack. You only cover the cost of shipping. Again, that's drinkelement.com/Cresser. DRINKLMNT.com/Cresser. Hey everybody, Chris Cresser here. Welcome to another episode of Revolution Health Radio. This week we're going to do something pretty different. It's not a typical health podcast. I am going to be having a conversation with Tom Gellie, who is my ski coach. He is actually in Australia, and we're going to talk about how I can have a ski coach in Australia as part of the conversation, because I'm not there, as you know. And Tom is a very high-level ski instructor who's worked with World Cup athletes and has a unique approach to skiing, but the show is not really about skiing. It's about learning and mastery in general and how to achieve that in any sport or physical activity that you are pursuing. It's a deep interest of mine, a passion of mine. As I talk with Tom about in the show, if I look back on my own life, one of the few common threads through almost everything that I've done in my life is this passion for learning and mastery. And so it's something I've thought a lot about. What contributes to learning and mastery? How do we cultivate it? What stands in the way of it? And, I'm always on the lookout for ways that I can learn faster and more deeply. And right now that just happens to be, skiing just happens to be the subject of that pursuit. It has varied at different times in my life. And Tom shares that and has a, like I said, a unique perspective as a coach. And he also really didn't start downhill skiing until he was 22. He's 38 now and is skiing at an extremely high level. So he has a little bit, he was on a different path than somebody who, there are many high level skiers out there who started when they were 3 years old or 2 years old and don't even remember learning. Tom started pretty much from scratch when he was 22. He also is a physical therapist and has one of the most sophisticated levels of body awareness that I've ever encountered. And this is something that I pay a lot of attention to. And I know a lot of people who are at a pretty high level in that regard. And Tom has this almost uncanny ability to identify, what someone is doing in their body and give them, very specific feedback. And I think that came out of his background in as a physical therapist, but also just being an adult learner and starting a new sport as an adult and having to develop and cultivate that in order to make it to the level that he's at. So I really enjoyed the conversation. We talked about, how to develop learning and mastery, what some of the common qualities are that people who have attained a high level in a sport or activity have. What are some of the common mistakes or obstacles that get people stuck or not making progress? Why understanding biomechanics and having a high level of body awareness is so important for people who want to progress in a sport or activity. And then some more specifics about learning and coaching using some of the modern tools and technologies that we have available to us now, both in skiing and other sports. So really hope you enjoy the show. It's a little something different and just in time for ski season in the Northern Hemisphere. For those of you that are skiers like me, I hope in particular that you get a lot out of it. So I think that's it. Let's dive in. Tom, welcome to the show. Pleasure to have you.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, it's great to be here.
So I've been looking forward to this conversation. I am a learning geek, like you are, Tom. And it's funny because we were doing some, it was an exercise at one of our company retreats, and I can't remember the exact nature of it or the exact exercise, but it was something about, reflecting on your life and looking to see if you can find one thing that was consistent across everything that you've ever done in your life. And for me, it was just that I love to learn and I love to get better at things that I do. And it almost doesn't matter what they are. I mean, it does. There's certain things I like more than others, but I love to learn and to get better. And, I've known you for not too long, but from the time that I've known you, my guess is that you share that in common, and that you're, that's my observation of you from what I've seen, not only with your skiing, but as a coach and just, and now surfing you're getting into and everything that you do. So tell me about that. Is that something, do you think about it that way? Is that something that's important to you?
Yes, I do. I do. And I've come to realize, so not only that the learning part is really driving me. I would say I'm really on the coaching side of things at the moment. That's a real, I see as a very big challenge, but a really enjoyable challenge. I mean, I'm coaching you this winter online. And so the challenges that brings up, I'm really enjoying that. And on that reflection thing, I can actually see myself way back when I was 8 years old, always trying to coach others who weren't as good as me on like how to hit a table tennis ball, like my brother, like giving him tips on that sort of stuff. So I think we all have certain attributes that we're strong with, and we're sort of given that as when we're born. And so I just feel like that's one of them when I look back, not only the really learning and mastering things, but I've realized I really enjoy the challenge of trying to help others master things. And yeah, that's tricky. That's really tricky.
It is.
Yeah.
I'm sure we'll get into more detail on that. But before we do that, I mean, it's also clear to me that this is true for you, because for those that are not familiar with you and your work, you're a very high level skier. You've trained and coached, World Cup level skiers from around the world, but you didn't. Unlike a lot of World Cup skiers, you weren't kind of like born with skis in your hands, right? You came to skiing a little bit later, and therefore I feel like you learned it and taught yourself how to do it in a way that was different from people that just grew up doing something like skiing.
Yeah, that's right. I actually took up downhill skiing at 22. So I'm 38 now. So as a 22-year-old, I did do cross country skiing sort of once a year. So like leather boots and walking around, because my dad was really into the outdoors and he wouldn't buy us lift tickets. So we would always do that. Yeah, I think it gives a very unique perspective, because I think the closer you are to, like, time wise learning something, it's far easier to help that person also go through the process of learning something new. And I think, I can't remember where I read this, but like the really proficient athletes often make the worst coaches. And everyone, I think people know that, but it's just because they never went through the struggles
Mm.
of finding out, like, they just stumbled across, oh, that's what you do. There's not much cognitive thought process and making the mistakes to get there. And so it's very difficult for them to relate to other people who don't find it that easy. And so
Right.
I think that's kind of lucky in a way, as me coaching skiing, especially alpine skiing. As an adult, I had to go through the mistakes and the frustrations. So it's sort of more in my recent memory to that. So there's definitely something in that part.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense to me. And it also, I've continually throughout my life in all kinds of different sports and physical activities had the same experience, where the people who are just natural athletes, and it still worked hard, but they from before almost that they could talk, they were doing that thing and they never really learned to approach it in the same way. And even in my own experience, like with surfing, I don't approach surfing the way I approach skiing. Like I just go out and surf and have fun and love it. And I think a little bit about what I'm doing, but with skiing, I'm so much more I probably understand ski technique and what I'm doing skiing way better than what I'm doing surfing, or at least could talk about it and explain it, even though I've only really, like you, I skied like once a year or something when I was growing up. And it wasn't until I moved to Utah that I really started skiing as frequently as I am now. But having said that,
Can I
yeah,
I
please.
have this question that it's just popped in my head, because you're coming into the second winter of you pursuing, like, skiing is your new
That's my passion
sport and
right now.
it's
Yeah.
your passion. Yeah,
Yeah.
you're really trying to get good at it fast. And how would you assess how you've gone so far? Do you think you're average for how, when you started and your experience? Do you think you're above average? Are you judging that on yourself, or are other people telling you how you're going? Because, like, say this podcast is around mastering something. I'm interested to hear your own thoughts on how you feel you're going, given you've really taken a deep dive.
Yeah. Well, the caveat is that I tend to be pretty hard on myself. So, um, and this is something I talk about on the podcast. I don't think I'm alone in that. Humans have a negativity bias. Daniel Kahneman has written a lot about that, and we tend to be much more focused on what's not going well and what isn't working than on what is working, and that can be helpful, I think, in times when you're learning something, but it also can be a shortcoming. I think it's also good to have be able to celebrate wins and kind of objectively see where improvement has happened. And I mean, in a lot of ways, I'm pleased with the progress that I've made, and I've worked really hard, and I appreciate that about myself. And I'm willing to put the time in and approach it with a lot of dedication and commitment. There's certain things I think in my skiing that have improved a lot. And then there are certain patterns that just seem really recalcitrant and difficult to shift. And those are super frustrating. We were just talking about one of those today before we got on the podcast for my most recent ski session. So it's mixed. You know, I will say that I'm having a blast. I love it. And that's the most important thing for me, that like, I don't want this to just become an exercise in like frustration and like a feeling of lack, or it's, as soon as it becomes that, it's not fun anymore, you know. And
No,
I don't, and so I'm not in that, I'm not hard on myself in that way. I feel a sense of the potential and like what's possible. And I feel a tension between that and where things are now. And there's a little bit of
yeah.
frustration there.
Yeah, because I guess I'm I hear you there. I'm thinking of like what, say in a sport, what are the measurables you've got? Well, one is your internal feedback, and
Yeah.
that often is like that tends to take over highest priority. You listen to that first, and like you said, can sometimes get you down pretty easily, but it's important because it's pretty honest. But then two is like an external kind of like a coach, or just other people around you telling you how, like from their perspective, how you're going. So, and then like something like video, again, very objective, really helpful. I think you kind of need to really keep checking those three areas as you go through learning something, because I think we get caught up in, especially the first one, where the negativity, where we're just all biased that we don't like making mistakes. And so I really think that having a coach is important, but then also that coach has to understand that probably the person is a lot of the time negative. And so they've got to find the small wins, point them out. So you're seeing a bit of a balance in terms of, well, things are going in the right direction in this little area. And so at least you're aware of, yeah, both the what's going well and what's
Mm-hmm.
not going well. I think a lot of people miss that part. I really do. And I think there's got to be a continual kind of cycle check, especially when you start getting like really hard on yourself. And I know this from just recent surfing. You know, when you're really frustrated, you're about to have a breakthrough
Mm-hmm.
because you're pouring all your efforts and you want to change it. And I thought I wasn't really getting anywhere, but then I got some video, and it was some things that I've been working on I could start to see. Even though I didn't feel that was great drastic change, I saw it, compared it to before, and I went, wow, okay, all those efforts and energy is really paying off. And then things changed. And then over the next few weeks, it was more enjoyable practicing because I'd seen the fruits of my labor.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I like that framework. Let's rewind and break that out, because this is, you know, we'll end up probably talking more about skiing than anything else, because that's what I'm interested in right now. And that's what you're coaching. But we, you know, this show is really about how to learn and master any sport or physical activity. And so, you know, you said, you asked the question of how do we actually engage progress, which is really important in the learning process. And one was our own internal feedback or compass. And that, you know, I think it's worth pointing out that that can be misleading in both directions, right? We can either be too negative on ourselves, or we can also perhaps have an inflated opinion of our abilities, and it could be, those aren't mutually exclusive. It could be both, right? You know, and that's why relying on internal feedback or subjective you know, your own internal subjective experience is not sufficient in terms of learning and mastery. You need to then have some source of external feedback. And one that you mentioned is, you know, just other people, you know, maybe peers in your group that you can trust and that will give you objective feedback. That's sometimes perilous as well, because people have, you know, some people will give objective and constructively critical feedback, and other people will just kind of tell you what they think you want to hear. So video is interesting in that way because it doesn't have any agenda. The video camera just captures what is there, and then each person can maybe use that as their own source of more objective feedback, right?
Yeah.
And then they can pass it on to a coach, which is that maybe a kind of third element that you mentioned. And then there might be, depending on the sport, there might be objective criteria as well. Like if you're weightlifting, if you're a competitive Olympic weightlifter, you can just see that now you're deadlifting 350 pounds instead of 325 pounds. And so you get some objective feedback that way. So it seems like all of these are important in the learning process.
Yeah. And I think the video one, I think in all sports, and just as we become more tech focused in life, there's just so much access to it. I think maybe we'll stick with that for now. That's a really important one, because like it makes me think of Instagram and all the beautiful people on Instagram. You've got to be careful what you're comparing to. Like I've seen this in skiing a lot, is someone comes along and they maybe get some feedback and they understand, oh, that's what I need to change. They can see where they're at, and they've been shown like a really good example, and then they get deflated when they're not really that close to the really good example. But if they compare it to where they were, there is some change.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think when you start using that technology and using video and photo, it's what are you comparing to is very important, because I've realized that like that's so important in learning, is you really need you need a comparison. You really do. Like where were you, what's changed now, and in what areas. Yeah, because otherwise it's very like, that's just the way we learn. We compare what we know, and if something is brand new, we always like to compare it back to something else we're familiar with and know about. And so that really advanced skier, or that that really cut guy in the gym or girl you're comparing to, like that's not really fair, because you haven't been where they are yet, but you've been where you were.
Right.
And so I think you just need to get your brain also to focus in on the bigger picture of everything as well, but also where you were, because that's what you're trying to see a relative change in and compare
Mm-hmm.
with.
Yeah, I think the other issue related to that is learning is never, in my experience, a linear process. And there are also certain principles that apply more at one level than at a different level. And even certain rules or principles that tend to be broken or bent at a higher level, that if you try to bend those at a lower level, you're generally not going to do well, right? So like, you show me
Yeah.
a video of a World Cup free skier, dragging their hip on the snow, and I go out and try to do that. It's probably like, just right from the get-go, it's probably not going to end up well. Or maybe they're doing something that they can do because they've already attained a certain level where they understand the forces involved and are able to kind of modify their technique in a way that's possible. But if I'm doing it at a slower speed or in it with a different kind of turn, that's going to send me totally in the wrong direction. So it's a lot
Yeah.
about being able to kind of assess where you are, and then what are the things that are going to be most helpful to you at that stage of learning that you're at.
Yes. Yes. And that's something I'm trying to, I guess, on the coaching side, or if you're on the coaching side, helping someone see where they need to go. It's much easier to show a really extreme example because it's obvious, but you're so right. There's that tricky part where you've got to say, well, but you're not trying to aim for that yet. I'm showing you that because so you can see it. If I showed you it in like a really mini increment, you'd be struggling to really compute that there's much change going on.
Right.
Yeah. And this is like, I find interesting, as I said, because I'm going through this process, especially online coaching where you're not exactly there. So video is a big, important part. It's things like that, yeah, is it really useful for me to hear what you're saying about me showing you a very good skier, you trying to, yeah, action it, and then having some troubles or getting yourself into trouble.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's, I think that's present even, at every level of sport, from when you're just starting out to even, fairly high level recreational athlete versus like a World Cup level athlete. There's still a really big gap in between those two groups of people. So I want to kind of go back to extracting some general principles of learning and mastery. You've worked with a lot of high level athletes, particularly in skiing, but in other disciplines, and also, recreational athletes that are very committed to the process of learning and mastery. And so, are there any consistent qualities that you see amongst the people that are having success, whether they're at a recreational level or at like a national World Cup type of level?
Mm-hmm. Yes. And I would term it KQ, or so instead of IQ,
Mm-hmm.
kinesthetic intelligence. Those people have far greater kinesthetic intelligence and awareness in their body. And if we sort of step back to, I'll think of some examples, coaching some people already at the start of this season, what I look for is when these people finally say to me, oh, I feel the mistake you pointed out in me. I couldn't feel it before, and it's taken them a few goes to finally feel that mistake, aware that you haven't fixed it yet, but oh, I feel that now. And then from there, they can start to use their internal compass to gauge improvement on it, because they know what the problem was. Good athletes, people that learn faster, they're far more in tune with the subtle feedback through their body, and so that part is generally a lot higher than than the average person. And that's what I would just say in general. A lot of people are missing if they're trying to master a sport, and it's just general body awareness. I feel that's something I've worked on and really has helped whenever I try a new sport or try and improve one of my sports. That part of me helps me, those buckets again, the video, the external coacher or friend give me feedback, and my own internal feedback. It's far more honest because I've worked on understanding like what pressure through this part of my foot feels like and how it's different from 2 millimeters forward of that or lateral of that. And that can be really easily worked on.
Right. Yeah, I think some people have the idea that that's just innate, and you either have it or you don't. And just to illustrate this, I mean, it's maybe obvious, but worth pointing out. If you say to me or someone else you're training, Chris, you need more hip angulation, or you need to drop your hip down further inside inside of this turn, or you need a little bit more less ankle flexion, or you need a little bit. If somebody can't feel what it feels like to flex their hip or extend their hip, or flex their ankle or extend their ankle, or counter rotate or whatever, then no amount of guidance or feedback to that end is going to make much of a difference in their skiing, if they're or whatever activity they're doing, if they can actually have the felt sense of what that is like. And I know from training with you that you've emphasized this a lot. And in fact, I think it was last year and maybe this year in big picture skiing, your ski academy, which we'll come back to at the end of the show, you have some body awareness and preparation exercises for people to do that actually allow them to cultivate that awareness, starting with the feet for skiing. That like you focus a ton on just the really, really fine awareness and detail of various movements in the foot that you want to be feeling in the ski boot, which I think 99% of skiers, even skiers at a high level, may not be thinking about or really feeling.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's been a change, or maybe an area I've really sort of paid close attention to the feet, because most sports, that's what's the first, that's what's giving you so much feedback about what's going on. And I was lucky enough to grow up in like the bush in Australia. So I lived on a quite a big piece of land that backed onto like government forest. And my brother and I would spend a heap of time, exploring, and a lot of the time barefoot, but just on really different textures and different terrain. And I think people listening, if they had that kind of background as well, they'll probably notice they have better kinesthetic intelligence in their feet because that stimulus was there when they grew up. And as the world gets more sort of developed, and where everything, paths are flat, things are all flat, it's we're in padded shoes, and I think you just can't help but lose that because you're just not getting the stimulus. So I really think it's a really easy step. The first part with the feet is to just try and get different textures under your feet, different, walking over different surfaces, and not wearing such thick shoes so you can start to feel it. And from there, you can also build this like these awareness exercise I do, because it's funny, like I put in the video, like strength and mobility, but I don't really think many of the exercises I have in there I would call strength and mobility, because I think that just comes from you trying to do something, and you'll do it better the more you feel what your body is doing. So I really am like catching people on, like, they hear I need to be stronger, I need to be more mobile, but really I see it as you just need to feel your body more.
Right. I agree with that. It's strength and mobility are easier to sell than awareness.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's just the reality of the situation, but awareness is really what leads to strength and mobility is kind of my interpretation of that. And yeah, like a lot of those exercises are really about feeling like, what is the first metatarsal doing? Like, can you feel the second one distinctly, and the third and the fourth? And what is the transverse arch doing? And, like very, really like tiring to do, but not because they're strenuous, because that level of attention paid to a part of the body that's typically not, it's just taken for granted, is, I think, taxing in a good way. You're really like building new neural pathways and creating connections there to where I can feel things in my feet now. And even like if I'm standing in line at the grocery store or something, I'm standing there like feeling those different parts of the feet and doing, a sort of class 2 lever action in my ankle joint versus the class 1. And yeah, I think that level of awareness, that's also been my experience. And people, again, if we take out the like 5% of people who are just I call them this in the most flattering ways, freaks of nature, who are just like achieved the high level with, granted, a lot of work, but not a lot of thought in, cognitive process around it. They just, they worked hard and it came somewhat naturally to them, and they didn't really have an analysis around it. But the majority of the people who achieve a really high level are people who have a pretty sophisticated level of awareness of their body and how it works, and
definitely
how to use it to their advantage in whatever their activity is.
Yeah, I think as an experiment, like, people could try, just set your phone up and like video yourself walking towards and then away, and look closely at, say, something easy to pick is like your arm swing. So this is just around body awareness. A lot of people don't realize like one arm will probably move a whole lot more than the other. And there might be a reason, there might be an old injury. And when they're walking, they feel like they're walking like you had symmetrical arms and all this stuff. If you don't put your brain's attention there, it doesn't think it's important because it has a billion things it's got on its mind. And that's not only just thoughts, but feelings. There's light, what you're seeing, what you're feeling, what you're hearing. So the brain's a filter in a way, because if it took everything in, you would probably be so stressed because there's so much stimulus. The great thing is with awareness, that's just a practice of putting the spotlight on one area. And that makes me think, like, in the pursuit of mastery, you have to be patient on your way there. If you're not this gifted person of like, okay, I'm just going to put my spotlight on my left arm for like a couple of weeks and just try and play with that. Realize, you'll probably go through that like phase of, wow, I didn't realize it just sat like a dead weight. Whereas the right is really mobile and nimble and moves in response to everything. Great. At least I feel it now. Now that I can feel that, then also if I change it, I'll be aware of it because I'm aware of the old sensation. Then I can feel a new sensation. And that's how you gauge, oh, great, I got 1 rep, 2 reps, 3 reps of a different feeling. So that the spotlight idea, because there's so much information, your brain being a filter that chooses where the spotlight is, I think that's a great kind of like principle to think about when you've got like 100 things saying you're skiing you want to work on. Just pick one, bring that up to scratch, move to the next one.
I want to come back to that because I think that's really important, both from a learner perspective and a coach perspective, is like how to give and receive feedback, or how to choose what you're going to work on. But when you were talking, something else came up for me in terms of like a universal principle of people who achieve mastery, and curious to get your take on it, which is like ability to, or willingness to be in a place of unfamiliarity or uncertainty or even awkwardness, and to endure that until the breakthrough happens. Because one of the things I've noticed that I have a tendency to do, and I don't think it's just me, I've seen it in other people and people I've coached in different activities in the past, is when we try something new, we're trying to change something, a movement pattern, it's unfamiliar, it doesn't feel good. And it also cannot look good. It can look awkward and strange, and we feel like we're not in a place of mastery. And it's all too easy to just like quickly go back to what is familiar, and it might even kind of look better, but we haven't really then made any progress on that thing that we're trying to change, and it's holding us back. So I'm curious if you see that too, like in people that you've trained that have been successful, that they have this willingness to like be curious and explore and even tolerate those periods of awkwardness and discomfort in order to get to the next level.
So at this stage in my life, I would say you've probably hit the number one most important thing in order to achieve mastery, is that you have to go through awkwardness and feel different. And that's where I see so many people do, like you said, just turn it back around. They try it. The internal feedback goes, well, that was weird and different. Not sure about this. Let's just go back to the other
old way. Yeah.
Yeah. It's real. As a coach, it's so frustrating to see, because you just want to be like, that's where at times, if you're in person with that athlete, with that student, you keep cracking the whip and saying, no, that's good. So there's that feedback they're getting. Okay, no, all right, I'll trust. I'll keep trying this awkwardness, go through the Bambi on ice stage, and then come out with a new movement pattern. I would say that is it. And I gave a talk to the CSIA, the Canadian Ski Instructors Alliance, that certifies all the ski instructors in Canada, last week. And it was on alternatives. The topic was alternatives. And so it was trying to get people to be okay with taking alternatives, because from looking into this, like, one, mistakes, we don't like making mistakes. Usually in life, we just avoid it. And Edward de Bono, he's a really great thinker. I'm a big fan of him. He sort of points out that it's better to, like, don't think of the word mistake. Like there's always, there should be a word for a worthwhile venture into something that doesn't come out the way you perhaps predicted to, but it's not a wrong thing, because at least you went down that road and checked it out. And I think a lot of people are not used to that just in general life. because it's risky. It's risky.
Mm-hmm.
You go like, instead of doing your normal 9 to 5 job, what if I really don't like that and I take an alternative? It's risky, of course, but like if you don't, nothing ventured, nothing gained. So yeah, that part's important. And that's where I think, we're talking about these important fundamentals, like having a coach or a friend at least who is helping you there to like say, no, actually that's doesn't look too bad. You might feel awkward, but that's looking more like what you both know you're aiming to
Yeah.
get. Yeah.
Yeah, some kind of feedback there, because it's all too easy to fall back into the habitual patterns that where even though we know they're not optimal, they're more familiar at least, and we might have some experience of some level of mastery or some level of performance or comfort that we don't want to give up in order to learn that new thing and get to the next level. So yeah, I think that's a big one. And just
I
even
think
extending that further, like, I mean, the willingness to do drills, for example, like in skiing.
that's what I was going to
And
say.
I,
Yeah.
drills for a lot of people are boring. They're not as fun as
Hmm.
just bombing down the hill or,
Yeah.
doing whatever else. And yet, like, I can definitely say that some of my biggest leaps have come from just doing drills. And
Yeah.
I think that's a whole nother conversation. It's like how to do drills properly. And because I think the there's the flip side of that where, you know, if you're just doing drills and just hammering the drills over and over and you don't have a chance to integrate that into your skiing, then that's not going to be good too. But I think a lot fewer people are running the risk of that than not doing any drills or things to train in the first place.
Yes, absolutely. And my co-coach in the academy, Sam, he's a former world championship skier. So he raced for Australia, and he's incredible talent. So he grew up at the snow in Australia. His dad was one of the best instructors in Australia at some point. He's a beautiful skier as well. So Sam is one of those people sort of given that
Yeah,
that
born with the
um that
skis in his
gift.
hand.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's really interesting seeing him now take on a coaching role and having to kind of like step back and try and think about past experiences where he had noticed a change. And we are talking about, there's this drill called the swords drill, where you hold your poles upside down, basically. So it's like a sword in your hand, the poles, and then you put them out wide and on the ground, and you try and keep both baskets on the snow the whole time. So you're essentially leaving like 4 tracks in the snow, your 2 ski edges and your 2 ski baskets dragging the whole time. And he said, like, he remembers his coach, who was also a former World Cup athlete, making him do that for 2 weeks straight at the beginning of the season. And he
Nothing,
said,
nothing
he
else.
didn't, yeah, nothing else. And he said he didn't
Yeah.
love it, he didn't hate it, and he realized he had to do it. And then at the end of the 2 weeks, he said that was probably one of the biggest breakthroughs, like in his technique he'd ever had, because he honed in this exaggerated feeling. Because you'll always back off a little bit from the drill. You go 100% into it, you'll probably take like 20% of it, like a quarter. And so the more you exaggerate it, the more you'll get probably the amount you need. And so I thought that was like a really good example, especially for someone like him that got to the top level 2 weeks, 2 weeks straight. And, he's probably skiing 6 days a week. It's a lot of hours doing it, and it paid off.
Right.
And
And
I'll just finish. When
yeah,
I
go
see
ahead.
people, and he's about to put out a video on the site around teaching this girl in Sweden, she grew up skiing. She's like, her family loves skiing. They'd go skiing every year, and she's a pretty proficient skier. But like what you mostly see, they just kind of like cruising down, not turns are not really dynamic. And anyway, he does this drill with her, and he goes, if you can do this drill right the first time, like you'll be the first person ever in history to do it right. Because nearly everyone thinks their poles are dragging, but then, next turn in, they're not doing the exercise. And of course she doesn't do it. And so, but he hammers her on that, makes her do it. And holy cow, like within an hour, she's got a new feeling, brand new sensation that she can now latch onto and go, that's what I need to feel. Self-coach yourself. Now Sam's role is to just be there like a little bit of time when she needs to remind herself of it. But yeah, the drills is just, I think, because that's the exaggerated feeling, the drill helps you know if you're exaggerated enough.
Right. Yeah. And
Yeah.
along with that, we could say just anything, training that is not directly like playing your sport or even practicing your sport per se, but training your body or preparing your body to be, more effective at the sport. And so when you look at like big wave surfing, for example, and you see like Garrett McNamara and Laird Hamilton like running with carrying boulders under on the ocean floor and doing like I know some of those guys, and they train at an insane level, like they're surfing a lot, but they are also spending a ton of time just training their and improving their fitness, improving their strength. They're spending a ton of time studying weather maps. I mean, they don't need to at this point, but they've spent countless hours. They're all basically meteorologists, and they have that level of ability to predict a swell. And they, when they go and surf a particular break, they'll study it for a long time to figure out, what are the contours of the bottom? Where's the wave going to break? Where's the best place to be in this situation and that situation? I mean, there's such a level of attention and detail that's being paid to and those things are not necessarily like the sexy fun things, but they're what make the difference between people at that level and people who are just at a kind of recreational level.
Yep. Yeah. And so it just made me think of the years I spent instructing. And as an instructor, you don't always get to, especially at the start, you don't get to ski with the people who are just ripping around the mountain. You're spending some time with people who are learning to snowplow, and I know selfishly, once I got my students a little bit knowing what they were doing, the rest of the lesson time I would be practicing. I'd be pretending I'm helping them, and I was still had an eye, but I didn't know I didn't have to have 100% focus on them. I would be doing my own drills. And so a little bit of apology to everyone that I've taught in the past, but I mean, hopefully they got some,
no, I think that's
of,
helpful. That's mirror neurons. And I want to ask you about that next. So yeah, so
okay.
you're doing drills.
Yeah. And every time, because I think, and this is just me reflecting on like what I think I did compared to say other instructors or skiers that just go through the motion. So you're teaching your friend to snowplow and you think snowplow is like boring and whatever, and there's nothing much in it. So you do a pretty bodgy snowplow, whereas you could still be working on all the things you need to do in your high-end skiing. What I realized I was doing all the time was every single second I got a chance to do that. And in Australia, it rains, so it's not that enjoyable at times. I would just use that time. Use it. It's like, well, I'm not going to have a great time skiing, but I can start getting the hours up towards it. So I think that comes into the category of obsession, really. Like a lot of really masterful people are obsessed, and I don't think it's a bad thing. I think it's just part of what you do.
My wife would probably agree with that assessment as it relates to me. Yeah, but I mean, if we spin that in a positive light, because I mean, obsession, I think depending on who you are, so some people do see that as positive. It can be both, right? But I think what that is also is just adaptability and flexibility. Like I'm always astounded by, and I get it to a certain extent, because not all of my friends here approach skiing in the same way. But like I've got friends who are like they won't even go skiing unless there's like 4 or 5 inches of new snow, and
Yeah,
I'm happy to get out there no matter what, because all I need is a strip of snow,
exactly.
like
Yeah,
20 feet wide, and there's lots of stuff I can work on and do to improve my skiing. And I love that. I love that I have that level of flexibility with skiing, because it makes it way more fun. And I always have said this about surfing in the past. It's like I literally, in what, I don't know, 40 years of surfing, have never had a time where I felt worse after surfing than before.
Mm-hmm.
Which, like,
Yep.
there's very few things that I can say that about in life. And I kind of feel that way about skiing. And I think it's because I'm less focused on, what are the external conditions, which I have no control over in most cases. And I'm more focused on how am I relating to those conditions, and like what can I make of them? How can I like make these work to my advantage? And
Yep.
that's something I've tried to cultivate. I'm not always successful with it, but when I am, I feel like it really helps my learning a lot.
Yeah.
Hey, everybody. I want to tell you a little bit about one of my favorite companies, Paleo Valley. I've been a huge fan of their products since they started. Their beef sticks are a family favorite on hikes, camping trips, and other outings, and their Organ Delight supplement is a fantastic way to get the benefits of eating organ meats for those that don't love the taste of liver. And I confess, I happen to be one of those, as as is our daughter. Paleo Valley shares my values around food and supplements, and I can always trust them to have the highest quality and best sourced ingredients. So if you'd like to check out their products, head over to paleovalley.com/Chris to get 15% off your first order.
Do you know? So thinking of Sam again, the guy who
Mm-hmm.
made Skid World Championships. I actually was his instructor for his level 1 when he stopped racing and he decided to do some instructing. I was his instructor, and it was a really low snow start to the season, and we were literally on a patch of like snow, like a couple of cars big, doing snow plows and really perfecting stuff. Anyway, he says that season, because he actually came back and he went to a first world championships a couple of years before that season, did this year instructing, partway through went, actually, you know what? I've got a chance. I want to ski again in the world championships, Beaver Creek. The year after, he went again. The difference, and he had a way better result, like way better, best result he's ever had. Felt really good. Difference was he was doing instructing, so he went back and did a whole lot of basics. And then 2, he started doing some structural integration with me. So I was a role for a structural integration. So I was working on his body, and he said he just started to, the awareness thing, even in his athlete level, increased again.
Mm-hmm.
And he was lifting weights easier. All these things were easier. And he came in, and because of that, had the best result. And so it was, again, doing something different to what he'd done before, like,
Yeah.
doing the boring
And, and,
stuff.
and, and the willingness to do it. So again,
Yeah.
this is the quality that we're talking about, where you've got a world champion skier who's snow plowing with you
Yeah.
on this tiny strip of snow, when, like, a lot of people at that level would be, I'm not going out there on, to do
Exactly.
that. I'm not going to do that. So
Yeah.
that's really, I think there's an element of humility there too, of just like
Mm-hmm.
being willing to look awkward and start over and do something that's totally unfamiliar, even within your own sport or your own, area of expertise or competence. I think it's even more challenging to do it within something that you already have a certain level of expertise at,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
It's easier
Yeah.
for,
Like your friends, even that only ski the 6 inches of powder day, you maybe go do some drills. If their ego takes over and they don't do the drill well, they're like, oh, what's the point in this? Like, that's a very easy cop out, instead of like,
yeah,
wow, I'm not actually as good at this than I thought it was. This is a
right.
foundational skill in my skiing. Like, what else am I going to go back and watch the TV or go and sit at the bar? Like, what are you going to do? Whereas I see those people could be like upping their off piste and the skiing they love to do, they get up early for.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
They
So
could be right. They could be
it's an
practicing
ego
things
thing.
that would make them thrive and do even better on those days that they are ready to get out there.
Yeah.
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 So we've talked a lot about, basic principles of learning and mastery, and, qualities that people who have attained high levels in various sports have achieved. Let's look briefly at the flip side of that. What are some of the most common mistakes or areas that where people get stuck, that in your mind prevent them from making progress? And it could just be like the opposite of everything that we just talked about. But if there's anything else that sticks out that you feel like is a limiting factor for a lot of the people you work with, I'm curious to know what that is.
Yes, I think it's the information or how you perceive information around the sport, because at the end of the day, how I communicate it, how someone else communicates how to ski a carve turn, for example, I'm trying to do my best to describe what I'm feeling, but it's never really going to come even close to being accurate to what is going on. And so there's a lot of information out there around, like, say, for instance, get forward when you ski. Like, most skiers will have heard that and know that, but then like there's the details on like when, how much, all those sorts of things that don't get covered. And so people, I think the first mistake is like really maybe cross-check your information and challenge it a few times. So if someone's telling you something, coach, whatever, you've got to ask them like, but why, but when, but how much, how do I know when it's right? What would be another way of saying this on your quest there? Because I think a lot of people just take it, right, get forward, for example, and then they overdo it and keep thinking because they're not getting better that it's just they're not doing that enough. So I think it's the information that people are getting. They just need to maybe study it a little bit more and be okay with challenging it. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's always good to do that.
I have a version of that, maybe slightly different but related, which is just information overload and too much information, too many sources of information, or not focused enough information. So I've noticed a quality in some of the best coaches that I've worked with in all different kinds of disciplines, including medicine, like teachers and medicine mentors for me, was an ability to quickly assess what's needed and then provide maybe the one instruction or cue that will address that thing, whatever that thing is. The coaches that are less effective, and when I'm less effective as a student or as a learner, are the ones that will give you 14 different pieces of feedback in relation to whatever the one thing that you're doing is, and maybe like explain the whole system. And I experienced this recently at a camp, a clinic that I was at, a ski clinic, early season ski clinic. And it really, I think if you understand the brain and how the brain works, there is a limit to how much we can process and think about at any one given time. And I've found that just finding that one cue that is the right one for that moment in time to get to the next step is very powerful. And it kind of goes back to what you were saying with Sam, where he did that drill for 2 weeks. Like, that didn't mean that he was going to do that forever. It didn't mean that there wasn't other important things that he needed to address. It just meant that, like, that simplicity of that focus, there was a trust there in the coach and a trust in Sam that would lead to positive changes, even without having to think about those other changes, just through focusing the attention on that one powerful cue.
Yes. So see, yeah, that's so tricky, because if there's all the ski instructors and coaches in the world in this pool, huge pool, how many of them would be good enough to do that? It would be a really small percentage. And so, like, if we're talking to everyone listening to this podcast, unfortunately, majority of people are going to get exposed to people that don't perhaps understand that with coaching. And so I think those coaches, it's not their fault. They're like, oh no, this is not working. What are the other 5 things out of, say, 1,000? I know, maybe I'll chuck that at them. Oh, that's not working. Chuck something. And so I think it's like pretty human too. So I'm like, because I can remember being an early instructor, I was just throwing what I knew, hoping someone would stick.
But we're talking about mastery, so we get to have this conversation. And I think it's worth pointing out that the fundamental prerequisite for that ability to focus on the one most powerful cue is body awareness. And whether you're talking about the coach being able to look at someone and quickly see what's not working, that's a really refined, sophisticated level of body awareness that you have developed over, many, many years, and through your work as well as a physical therapist. And like you've got a very, I know a lot of people in this world, and including my wife, who's a Feldenkrais practitioner and has also a really exquisite body awareness. So it's something that I'm tuned into and I recognize when I see it. So you couldn't do that. You couldn't give someone that specific cue if you were not able to see what is not working in their body, right? That would be
Yes.
impossible. And then I, as a student, would not be able to act on that cue and feel it and experience it and experience what it's doing to my skiing, or if I don't have that level of body awareness. So I really do think it, going kind of full circle back to what we said, was the one single most important quality that all of these high level athletes have. It's that body awareness. And so we could
Yes.
extend that to coaching too, like high level coaches.
Yes. A guy named Norm Kreutz, who's a legend in the Canadian Ski Instructors sort of alliance, he made a comment at the end of the talk I did saying that he remembers a time when he was skiing with the head of the Canadian Instructors Association at the time. They were on the chairlift, they were doing some training on short turns. And the head guy said to him, Norman, we really need to like turn our feet really strongly in the short turn. And Norm, natural athlete, has that kinesthetic IQ, goes, do you know what? I disagree. I do not feel that. When I turn well, I feel like my thigh is turning, but my foot is actually turning the other way because that helps me tilt it on the edge. So because he has that kinesthetic IQ, he was able to challenge it, find like them to maybe now start a discussion on, okay, right, maybe the head guy needs to change the way he describes things. But if you don't have that, you do what someone tells you to do. If you don't feel, you're not feeling what's going on, you can't really then challenge that info. So again, that guy could have been, he was the head of the association, knows a lot. But if the guy who had the great intelligence did exactly what he was saying to do, he would have skied worse,
right?
Or not what he really so it helped him get out of a situation that could have led him down a really bad, or just the wrong path.
Yeah.
Not getting better. So
totally agree. And I mean, we don't have time to go into all the different methodologies that you can use for developing kinesthetic awareness. There are different ones in different sports. There are some general ones like the Feldenkrais method, for example, that are kind of universal that can help with that. But and then within the context of skiing, Tom's Big Picture Skiing Academy is a phenomenal resource. There's so much body awareness and prep stuff in there that if you just did that, with nothing else, it would be worth it, because that's going to make such a huge difference in your skiing. But before we finish up by talking about some of the resources you have available, which I want to do because they're so awesome, I want to briefly talk about how we work together in terms of including all the technology and the stuff we use, because I think that's a really interesting aspect of learning and mastery that's fairly new. Like these things were not available to us 20 years ago as teaching tools and as learning tools. And I know that I'm definitely getting a lot out of it. And of course there are pitfalls and caveats, but overall, I think it's pretty amazing. And we're going to focus this on skiing, but they're not exclusive. At least a couple of them are not exclusive to skiing. And there's lots of other similar technologies available in different sports now. So Tom's in Australia. I'm in Utah.
yeah.
So that's the first interesting thing here in terms of the fact that Tom's my ski coach. We've never met in person. Hopefully that will change this year. But so I mean, just being able to work remotely with a coach, and I feel I've had in-person ski lessons, and this is not a criticism of the instructors necessarily that I've had in person, but I can say that I've benefited 100x more from my work with Tom over the past couple seasons than I have working in person with a ski instructor. And I've thought about why that is. And I think there are a few reasons, and we can use this as a segue to get into the technology. One is just how learning happens. I think having a 1 day, full day, 8-hour ski lesson, I'm probably going to get in trouble with the ski instructors for saying this, is really not actually, if you were to design the ideal learning situation, that wouldn't be it. Like an 8-hour lesson is like a fire hose. You're going to retain 5 to 10% of that if you're lucky. And there's no time to really integrate unless you spent, I actually think the best lesson would probably be 1 day just focusing on one thing, going back to what we were talking about before, but probably a lot of people wouldn't pay for that. But like the way learning happens, it's a lot about integration, right? So like I go out skiing. If I can twist my wife's arm into taking a video of me, I'll do that. But now, fortunately, I have a friend here in Park City who also works with Tom. And so we go out and video each other. I send the video to Tom, and he uses a tool, an app called OnForm, which, Tom, you could talk a little bit more about from the coach perspective. But he not only can watch the video, but he can mark it up with, draw on it and, show me my angles and do all of that. And then I also have these sensors in my ski boots called Carve, that's CARV, and it's a company that Tom has been involved with, helping them develop the product. Basically, it's got the same kind of technology that's in your phone, so it can tell what angle my feet are tipped at. It can tell how much pressure is on the front of my foot, how much pressure is on the back of my foot, and so just through that basic technology, they can give you all kinds of feedback, like what is your edge angle, how is your fore aft balance, how similarly are you turning your skis. And Tom can also look at that data in conjunction with the video and get a pretty complete picture of what's happening and how I'm skiing. And then he'll give me feedback, and then I'll go away and I'll work on that. And then, come back a few days later, maybe a week later, and get the next thing. And that, I feel like that's so much, just a much more effective way of learning. So talk a little bit about this technology and how it's helped you as a coach, and what it brings to the equation.
Yeah, I think what's been great is, like you said, the 8 hours a day thing. That's often what people think, like more time is better. But then that takes away, that kind of then puts even the way you think about that, that's like, oh, the more I get from this coach, the better I'll get. And so the input is not really coming from the person. And so I feel straight away like the best thing about the online style coaching, what we're doing, is we get the one thing, we chat about it, we get a chance to chat back and forth. And it might even be 3 days later when it's filtered in, we still chat about it. We haven't changed the subject. So there's a process, a natural process you don't have to go through within the 1 day. So I think that's really advantageous. And yeah, the person's awareness has got to increase, because they're only working with this little bit of info. They've been like, can you change this? Can you try this? Now they have to go out. You have to go out, Chris, and try and figure it out and go through. You have to go through the struggles to compare and contrast and know you really own it. Like I think a lot of people might have even had a great lesson with an instructor once, and I'm feeling really good, and then they lose it,
Right?
because it was almost like given to them, and then they have to go back and book that instructor again to get that same feeling. So then you're reliant on it. So I really am trying to get people to the point, because that's where I feel why I progressed. Starting skiing later in life, I did a lot of this. I would get something off a really good skier, and then I'd go away and I wouldn't talk to anyone. I would just go and practice. So I'm kind of passing on what I know has worked for me. And the online thing seems to force that in a way, because they can't go and book me again for 3 hours. And then like we talked about, the comparison thing, like that's so powerful, You think you're doing something. You have this video and you can see that, you know, if you are or not. You can then also show people, help them with showing them they're making progress, even though they
Yeah.
see it and overall it looks crap. You know, they're like, oh, I haven't changed. But then you put it side by side, look closely. Oh, there's 3 degrees different. See, like what you've done has done something. It's just only 3 days of you practicing it. So you can, it really helps me motivate the client and say, look, you're doing well, instead of, you know, hearing it from them and not being able to prove that they're
Yeah.
improving. Yeah, I think
That was a big
that's
one for
amazing.
me too,
Yeah.
and continues to be. I mean, like the side by or top bottom or side by side, however it ends up looking in the app, the comparison of when we were, you know, this last summer, I learned to inline skate, and I was doing it, you know, basically to train for skiing in the off season. That yes, that is how obsessed I am. You know, I mean, I enjoyed the skating part too to some extent, but it was really, I wouldn't have been doing it if it wasn't for skiing. You know,
Yeah.
I'd never in my life ever had the interest to learn to inline skate until last season, and just seeing that the progress that I made throughout the summer in terms of like angulation, what was happening with my upper body and my feet, it was really, really interesting. And I definitely feel like some of that has carried over into my skiing, at least starting out this year. Like I started this year, and you know, we can talk about the pros and cons of carve in a second here, but I started this year like at or above my highest scores of the whole season last year in carve. And I feel like that was a direct result of doing that skating training all summer. Like, I don't think there's any way I would have just started right at or above the level I was at the highest point of the season last year. So that kind of feedback is really helpful.
Yeah, definitely. And sorry, I also realized I hadn't talked about the carve part. I think to even putting me aside, just this technology in terms of carve is fantastic, because the guy who developed it, like invented it, decided this is something he wanted to do. His overall vision is that the learning process is like really uninterrupted. So you can basically be skiing and your headphones, you can have your headphones in, and it's like almost basically telling you, did you realize you were back on that turn?
Yeah.
You make another one. Did you realize you were too far forward? So then you don't have to stop. So it's very instant. The coaches, I mean, they call it Carve Digital Ski Coach. So that's the idea. And I think when that technology at the moment, it's already great, but when they're refining it further and further every year.
Yeah.
I think that's going to be a big game changer, and a lot of people who are willing to go down the road of experimenting, check their ego, try some of the recommended tips and drills and things, they're all getting better.
Yeah.
They're
Yeah.
all,
I mean,
yeah,
I think my score in the last 2 years has improved by like 20 or 25 points, I think, on average.
hmm
And like when I first started skiing with you, Tom, when I first started using carve, so it's, I can't attribute that all to carve because I've been working with one of the best ski coaches in the world. So but I think the combination is really powerful.
yep,
And I, you
yep,
know, and from my perspective, carve does not replace working with a good coach. It just enhances the whole experience. And
yes,
you know, I think you could work with carve alone and make huge progress. And like if I didn't have access to you or a really good ski coach, I would for sure still be using carve and getting a ton out of it.
yep,
And also I could just work with you and make a ton of progress as well without carve. But putting those two together, I think is where like it gets really exciting and fun. And you know, again, I'm not as familiar with what's available in different sports. I think there are similar things in golf world now, certainly like lots of video analysis and simulator stuff happening. But just, you know, if you're listening to this and you're not a skier and you're interested in the kind of things that we're talking about, do a little research and see what's available. You might be surprised. I think there's a renaissance happening now in this world, and there's a lot of new tools available for learning. I mean, if this had been available when I was growing up skiing, I probably would have approached it differently and had maybe had a different experience. But it just makes it so much more fun for me.
Yeah. Hey, Chris, maybe before we finish up, I asked you right at the beginning, I said, how do you think your progress is going compared to the average person, and what are you basing that on? And so, like, maybe there's your own thoughts, maybe there is also what other people are saying, and maybe there's video. So
All
can
right.
you,
Well,
yeah,
I've had feedback from people around me, including my wife and friends, who have remarked on they think they seem impressed with how much I've improved and how quickly I've improved. With video, like I said before, like I see certainly objectively that a lot of things have improved dramatically. When I look back at video from like 2 years ago, or 2.5 or 3 years ago, I had kind of that abbreviated 2000, was it 2020 COVID season, where I got maybe 2 months before the mountain shut
yep,
down. And then there are certain issues which very well, Tom. We don't need to go that have just been present that whole time, and maybe to a lesser degree now than they were initially, but that have been slower to change, that I'm aware of and kind of get frustrated by. It's really hard for me to kind of like assess my progress versus the average person, because I'm not really in close contact with a lot of average, like other
people that have
skiers
started
who
skiing
are
a few years ago, and
yeah, exactly.
yeah,
Like I don't know, I mean, I did ski like once a year when I was growing up, so it wasn't totally new to me, but I hadn't skied in 25 years or something. And I had done some snowboarding in the interim. So I feel like I wasn't starting from complete scratch, like I wasn't starting from like a snow
yeah,
plow or something like that. Uh, I don't know. I would like to think my progress is slightly was above average, just in terms of my level of commitment and dedication to it, and the support that I've had. But honestly, it's hard for me to assess, because I don't know that many other people who are starting from a similar position from me.
mm-hmm. Yep. That's where I think you got to trust
Why don't
the
you tell
friends.
me,
And
Tom?
well, I think what you said, like the people around you, because they're observing you versus what they're also seeing going on and being skiers. So I would trust that. And I think you are accelerating the learning curve from my perspective. I think you are. I feel it's, I mean, maybe even to your question, what's the biggest mistake? I feel like there's like something at the start of this season, it was good too. You went on a camp and you took on some different ideas on how to move in skiing. And I think there's actually some really good things that have come out of that. But then some of what you're seeing in your skiing now that maybe you don't like the look of, I think that's you just trying to work on some new, like a coach telling you to try
Yeah,
turning your body this way, do this with your hands, do this with your feet. And so I feel that once there's some consistency starts happening again, I really feel like end of January, there's going to be a big difference again, a big leap. So yeah, and I think it's really important to look at it not in terms of that wasn't a good thing to do. Again, it's that experimenting, like there's always good that comes out of going down a road that maybe doesn't lead to the perfect results you expected
yeah,
to come from it. There's always, yeah, you're just learning to find out the spectrum of what things
yeah.
can happen in the skiing.
And maybe this is another quality as well for learning and mastery. Something that has served me well, that I appreciate about my approach, is that I'm not dogmatic, and I don't get wedded to any particular system or framework, or I will take whatever I can get from anybody or any system or any framework or any ideology that I think is helpful. And that when I run it through my own filter of testing with my experience and in my life, if it resonates as true for me, then I will take that piece from that system, even if the entire rest of the system is junk and doesn't help me at
Mhm.
all. I will take that piece. And I think that's another important quality for learning and mastery, is just having that discernment and not getting too wedded to any one particular system or ideology.
Absolutely. Yeah, I totally agree. And I always say this, I think that my biggest breakthroughs in my own skiing have come from doing things that I perceive were wrong,
Right.
because someone else before said, don't do that. That's bad in skiing. That's bad ski technique. So I've like stopped going down that avenue. And then the day I do, wow, something, because it's completely different, new sensation. I can internally gauge that and go, whoa, what was that? So I
Yeah.
think that's a really, yeah, important, yep, concept.
Yeah, and you gotta be willing to be wrong. And I know you
Yep.
used that example recently where you argued with someone and said, "No, no, you're wrong about that," and then you went out and tried it and found out that they were right.
Yep.
So that
Exactly.
that's the way. If you really want to be like brutally focused on improving, you got to be willing to be wrong in that kind of way, and I
Yep.
think that's true not just of learning sports, but of anything else. Just be kind of relentlessly honest with yourself and open to being wrong and changing your mind if the circumstances warrant that. So
Yeah. So true.
all right, Tom. So I'd love for you to talk a little bit about the various resources that you have available. Not everyone who's listening to this, of course, is a skier, but we certainly will have some skiers in the audience who want to learn more about this approach to skiing. So tell people where they can learn more about your work.
Great. Well, I'm first going to say I'm going to give some a resource that's not my own, but one of my mentors, Gary Ward. And he's from the UK, and he developed a system called Anatomy in Motion. If you go to anatomyinmotion.co.uk, he he helped me learn a lot of body awareness exercises and ways of going through that. You can find some awesome resources there, online learning for anyone to just start your body awareness journey. And he's a fantastic coach, mentor, instructor for just body stuff. So that one I'm saying first because he's really helped me get where I'm at. So that's for everyone. For the skiers, bigpictureskiing.com is sort of my spin on a lot of that stuff and put into the skiing world. And on that side, I just put videos up and I try and break them into categories based on all the different elements of skiing. Plus, as you mentioned, indoor, dryland, body awareness exercises, that sort of stuff. And it's growing as I get feedback from people and say, well, that was really good, but I don't understand this bit. So it's a live organic beast that keeps growing. So I really enjoy that part. And I think people will enjoy that if they go check it out.
One thing I
There's
want
a
to say
free
about that
trial.
too is this is also a key point in learning and even just how you structure the learning experience. And you and I have talked about that, Tom, because have a lot of experience in online education in a different field. And I love about big picture skiing is like this. I can go in there. Let's say I want to improve my carving. I can go in there, click on video library, and there's a whole section on just carving instructional videos. I don't have to wade through a whole system of like, here's my system of 45 different point,
Steps.
my 45 point theory on everything. I don't want your 45 point theory on everything. I want to see the drills on carving and the videos on carving for now. Then maybe later
Yeah.
I'll be interested in your 45 point theory on everything. But I think that's the best way to do it. And, in that section, there's videos on upper body, arms, bumps and moguls, biomechanics, equipment. We haven't talked at all about equipment and the role that plays in learning and mastery of any sport, but especially skiing, like how you set up your boots. And there's just, tons of videos on that, which is really critical. I think that's so important because it gives people lots of different entry points depending on where they are in their learning process.
Yeah, that really makes me happy to hear that that's how you see the learning is done through the site, because I enjoy doing the programs and the courses and the multitude of different ones I've done in my life. But some of the best learnings have come from like conversations with friends over time. And so I'm almost trying to make the site like jump into Tom's brain, Tom's mind, as he goes and he puts down what he's learned in the past, and then also find out what he's discovering and learning at this moment. And it may seem like I'm jumping like a bit randomly around, but in my head, and I think everyone realizes this, we don't actually think very logically, or the way we think logical thinking works. It is very fluid, and you're sort of seeing that. And so people can go to the site, start at carving, and then I mention something in a video and they go, what is that about? And you can then just search and go, oh, now I'm over at biomechanics. Oh, and then now I'm over at body awareness, and now I'm at equipment. So yeah,
it's very easy to fall down the big picture skiing rabbit hole, like YouTube, clicking on one thing to another. Yeah, for sure.
But I think it's just my take on, I don't really like do step 1, 2. I think there's times when that's really important, but yeah, I sort of am a bit against that must do, because that's rigid. And then I wouldn't be able to go into a video later and say, hey guys, I'm really sorry. That video, actually, I wasn't quite correct, or I've got a different take on it now. It allows me to change my mind and not be rigid.
Yeah, that's something I appreciate a lot about you, Tom. And I wouldn't really commit to working with someone who doesn't have that mentality and the willingness to admit when they're wrong, and to make progress in their own approach. And frankly, that's a pretty rare quality, unfortunately, in the high level coaching world. Often there's a lot of ego and a lot of attachment to kind of system that someone's created, and an unwillingness to reconsider, because then, if you've written 5 books about your system, it's a lot harder. It's a lot harder to admit that you were wrong or change your mind, right? So it's I like that you do that, and that shows up a lot in your work. So you got big picture skiing, which is essentially, for those that are familiar with like what a membership site is, that's the general concept. You subscribe, you get access to all this amazing content and webinars and stuff like that. Tom, you also have some kind of programs for people who want to go deeper, including one-on-one private coaching, like we've done. And then, are you calling it? Is it the Academy? Tell us a little more about those. Yeah, those programs.
Yeah. So diving deeper, you've got a private session, which you can do half an hour or an hour, Zoom session like this. And I often just go over video, or some people don't even have video, that they know what they want, and they show me in the kitchen, like, I can't do this. I can't do this. And people tell me I should do that. What do you think? So there's that option, which is really good. And then the Academy is deeper again. We do like a half season or a full season of coaching. And that includes the on-form, back and forth video analysis that you mentioned, as well as some like weekly Zoom classes on a topic. Or it might just be there's 10 people in there. We look at a couple of people's videos they've sent in and make sure like they can ask questions, and that's the thing. That's for the people like you, the obsessed ones who like their season is spent skiing, and they're really into taking the deep dive. So not for everyone, but and what's great about that for me is I really am learning so much, because I'm getting all this information coming in of what's working and what's not. And so I'm like already adapting on the fly. Whoa, okay, right. I need to restructure how I say that first, and this should, so it's really been good. But those are the 2 things: private coaching and the Academy. And the Academy is an application thing, because it's just Sam and I. So we can only take on limited people, and want to make sure it's right for you. But that tends to be for instructors and like you said, people like you that just skiing's their jam, it's their thing.
Yeah. And then you've got a podcast, right?
And then I got a pod. That's right. Yeah, got those. The Big Picture Skiing podcast. So that's got some really interesting chats with different people. So that's worth checking out on Spotify and iTunes podcasts. A YouTube channel.
I was going to say, so you post some YouTube videos.
Tom Gellie. Yeah. So that's got a lot of good stuff, and you can sort of see my evolution as a skier, because it started out not really trying to teach people stuff. It was just, hey, here's me skiing. And then Instagram, Tom Gellie, Big Picture Skiing, Facebook. So you can find me on all the major channels there. And yeah, I think YouTube's a really good place. The YouTube and the podcast is a really good place to start to see, like, yeah.
I would say that too. Yeah, you can. It's so helpful, I think, just to watch skiing, good skiers skiing and see, like, we didn't get really into this, but I think one of the other key things with learning and mastery is doing your activity with someone who's better than you. And the mirror neurons that, like, I've noticed just skiing behind, there's some really good skiers in Park City, including former World Cup athletes. So occasionally when I see one of them, I'll just kind of lurk behind them a little bit, follow them and ski behind them. And it's like that almost as much as anything else can really accelerate my learning. And so
much.
Yeah, watching Tom ski on YouTube, I think you post sometimes links to other people on Instagram and Facebook. You shared a video with me earlier today. It just blew my mind of I don't even know who that guy is, but those turns were just insane. And I feel like I could just watch and study that for a long time and benefit hugely. So
I'm so curious to see my four-year-old son Archie hit the slope. So we're going to Canada in less than 2 weeks for a month. And he's already skied in Aspen and Australia before, but he was much smaller and so now I think he's at the right level. But I notice him watching me coach online, hearing what he's saying, what I'm saying to other people. And he asked me, like, the other day, he's like, Dad, is this the right ski move? Dad, and we're on the trampoline practicing lateral jumps.
Yeah.
I'm very curious to see what happens with him. Because he's
gonna absorb a lot of this, through osmosis. He's gonna be a ripper.
I'm very curious to see. He may hate it. He may. So
unless he decides he just wants to be a surfer instead or something, which
so but that'll help. Like, I think also, I'm just thinking, like, years down the track, already I've done a whole lot of, like, what I would call self-research with Archie. I made him, like, he was always barefoot so much of the time. I would put him in situations that would challenge his balance, that would do all this sort of stuff, expose him. And already I would say he's a much better athlete than the average kid. And I want to say a lot of it is through, it's not just genes, it's exposure to that stuff. And so 10 years down the line, like, I'm just wondering, what am I going to be sharing on Big Picture Skiing? Because I've known, this really, I know this worked, and passing on to other people that have kids that want to develop an athlete. And on that final thing, there's this guy, Christian Thibodeau, he's Canadian coach, like, really high-end athlete, and himself as well. And I think he wrote a book, or he wants to write a book, on your kid sucks and it's your fault. and I remember listening to that when Archie was like 1. I was like, whoa, thank goodness, because he said at 3, like, by the time they're 6 months old, there are things you probably want to do that he's finding out all good athletes, like, have that kind of stimulus before that age. And so it's like, if you don't do it in this period, it's too late. So I found that fascinating.
Interesting. Yeah, that'll be the next podcast, Learning and Mastery for 6-month-olds.
Yeah. For your newborn.
For your newborn. Yeah. So how to set them up for a Olympic career starting at 0 years old. Yeah. All right. Well, Tom, thanks for coming on the show. It's been a pleasure to talk to you. Everybody, check out bigpictureskiing.com. Check out Tom on YouTube and Instagram. The Big Picture Skiing podcast, great, really fascinating conversations if you're a skier. And Tom, I'm probably talk to you tomorrow or something, Tom, but it was a pleasure to have this conversation.
Yeah, pleasure too. Thanks very much, Chris.
All right, everybody. Thanks for listening. Keep sending your questions in to chriskresser.com/podcast question, and we'll talk to you next time. That's the end of this episode of Revolution Health Radio. If you appreciate the show and want to help me create a healthier and happier world, please head over to iTunes and leave us a review. They really do make a difference. If you'd like to ask a question for me to answer on a future episode, you can do that at chriskresser.com/podcastquestion. You can also leave a suggestion for someone you'd like me to interview there. If you're on social media, you can follow me at twitter.com/chriskresser or facebook.com/chriskresserlac. I post a lot of articles and research that I do throughout the week there that never makes it to the blog or podcast, so it's a great way to stay abreast of the latest developments. Thanks so much for listening. Talk to you next time.